Hello everybody, this is TipTopMTG here today with another Magic the Gathering video. In today's video, we are taking a look at Innistrad Crimson Vow and taking a look at the top 10 most expensive cards in the set. Then I'm going to compare it to Midnight Hunt when it launched and talk about all of the rares over $4. So this is going to be a jam-packed video, sit tight, and let's jump into this. Starting off at number 10, we have Kaiageist Hunter. It's going for about $11 right now. Now, I do have to take some time to tell you about some disclaimers. So first off, these are pre-order prices. These are the prices as of the day everything has been spoiled. In addition, these are prices from Card Kingdom, which are generally a little bit inflated. And then also, obviously, this is in USD, pre-order, all of that means this is going to change a lot. So just expect, if you're watching this, a month or more away, expect all these prices to be different. But it still is an interesting look to see what people think are going to be the most played cards, because those are typically the most expensive ones. But either way, let's jump into this card. Kaiageist Hunter. 1 white and a black for a legendary planeswalker Kaya with 3 loyalty. You can +1 it, and it says creatures you control gain death touch until end of turn. Put a +1/+1 counter on up to 1 target creature token you control. So giving everything death touch is a pretty good ability. Having to, put that +1/+1 counter on only a token is a little bit limiting, but let's see the rest of it. -2, until end of turn, if 1 or more tokens would be created under your control, twice that many of those tokens are created instead. Anytime you're doubling something, it's generally pretty powerful. I mean, take a look at cards like Anointed Procession, Doubling Season. All of those that double tokens are pretty good. The issue is, this is on a planeswalker where you only get it until end of turn, and she can only do it once. So basically, you're playing this, probably not -2ing it right away, because you probably use some mana, and if you have some big effect that creates tokens, you might want to save it. So then you have to hope it survives another turn. Or you can read this as a spell that says 1 white and a black until end of turn. If 1 or more tokens would be created, and instead create double, which is not bad. And then if it does happen to survive, you get some bonuses there. So I think if this card is played, that is the ability it's being played for. And then it has a -6, exile all cards from all graveyards, then create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying for each card exiled this way. So yeah, you're going to create a lot of tokens, which then can all get death touch with the +1 if Kaya survives. And if you can somehow get 2 Kayas with like a spark double, or I don't know, ulting Kaya, no, because the effect would have to happen all at the same time. You'd have to like -2 Kaya and somehow get another Kaya, which is at -6. So it'd be a lot of work to do, but you could double that. Either way, it's an interesting planeswalker. Generally, almost every planeswalker in the set ends up in the top 10 list, and I think that's just because planeswalkers are so hard to see their value in terms of how much they're going to be played, because so much of it is based on play patterns, and that's really hard to see just from reading the text. So most of the time, just to be safe, the prices on planeswalkers are pretty high during pre-orders, and then will fall pretty drastically. So this one's just barely on the top 10 list. Either way, moving on, we have Henrika Domnath. It is 2 black for a legendary creature vampire 1/3 with flying, and it says, at the beginning of combat on your turn, choose one that hasn't been chosen. Each player sacrifices a creature, you draw a card and lose 1 life, or transform Henrika. So basically, you can make everyone sacrifice a creature, then you can draw a card, and then you can transform it, or you can transform it right away. What does it transform into? Well, it transforms into Henrika Infernal Seer. It's a 3/4 with flying, death touch, and lifelink, so those are some pretty good abilities. Then you can pay 1 black, and each creature you control with flying, death touch, and or lifelink gets +1/+1 until end of turn. So you kind of get this fire-breathing effect for everything with death touch, flying, or lifelink. I do think that is interesting. If you want to play it for the backside, this can basically be played for that. Like if we look at this last card, at the beginning of combat on your turn, let's say this is your commander. You can literally play this on your pre-combat main phase, go to combat, and then just transform it immediately. So really, this is a 4-cost card with these abilities. I could see some really interesting things being built around it. It's $13. And then also just, that is pretty aggressive. 4 mana for a 3/4 flying death touch lifelinker that can also be controlling if you don't want to immediately get it to this side. So I could also see this being pretty good in a control deck. Death touch, stopping combat, making people sack creatures. It does replace itself if you're willing to wait a couple extra turns. So all of that's pretty cool. Then for also 13 bucks, we have Cemetery Prowler. It's 1 green for a creature wolf, 3/4 with vigilance, and it says when it enters the battlefield or attacks, exile a card from a graveyard. That is just bonus. I mean, a 3-cost, 3/4 with vigilance, kind of weirdly, is not that crazy. I mean, we have things like Questing Beast, a 4-cost, 4/4 Death Touch, vigilance, all of that. I don't even remember what it has on the card because there's so much of it. I know that's not in standard anymore, but just as a reference of what we kind of have for mana costs, it's not as crazy. But the fact that it's exiling stuff is nice, but obviously you're not going to play it just for that. So it says, spells you cast cost 1 less to cast for each card type they shared with cards exiled with Cemetery Prowler. Now we get kind of insane. It enters the battlefield and you exile a creature card. Now every creature that you cast costs 1 less. Oh, you want to cast an instant? Just exile your opponent. So I think this will be played in a decent amount of decks. I mean, this just, it will stop card or decks that care about exiling or their graveyard, sorry. And then even if their deck doesn't, this thing is making everything of yours cheaper. On top of that, it's a 3/4 for 3 with vigilance. So I think this is going to be a pretty good card because it is so versatile. It can be utility, it can stop your opponents, it can just make everything easier to cast. This is essentially mana ramp mixed with hate bearing, mixed with the good creature stats. So pretty good. Next we have Brook, Caretaker. It's 4 green for a creature human werewolf, 4/4, and with hexproof. So 4/4 with hexproof, not bad, but for 6 mana, that's a lot. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put 2+1/+1 counters on another target creature you control. Pretty big effect. Luminarch, Aspirant, 1 and a white. You can put a counter on anything at the beginning of combat. It's only 2 mana instead of 6. But this one also has Daybound, meaning on its backside, it is Howlhenge Huntmaster, which has hexproof. And it gives other permanents you control hexproof. So I don't love this. So a lot of the times when things give everything hexproof, it itself is not. This is hexproof, gives everything else hexproof, which means you need mass removal, essentially, to deal with this. So that's really, really powerful. And then at the beginning of combat on your turn, put 2+1/+1 counters on each creature you control. Not just one creature, like the front side. And remember, all you need to do to get to this side is not cast a spell on your turn, which you won't need to if you're boosting all your creatures and they all have hexproof. So I think if you're building a werewolf deck, this is probably the bomb you're planning on ending the game with. If you get this in limited or draft, that is insane. The fact that it has hexproof and everything else has hexproof, I think this is a very, very playable card in decks that can reliably transform it. I do think that you need to look at how easy it is to get to that Nightbound side and stay on it. But I do think in those decks like Tovolar, who can pretty consistently make it nighttime, if we're looking at a commander sense, or maybe a werewolf deck where you're already worried about that, this is going to be really, really good. And it's going for 15 bucks, so that shows it. Then jumping up to 20, we have Soarin the Mirthless. So here we have another one of the Planeswalkers. Again, typically these are one of the first ones to fall in value. It's 2 black for a legendary Planeswalker Soarin for loyalty. +1, look at the top card of your library. You may reveal that card and put it into your hand. If you do, you lose life equal to its mana value. So you're basically going to replace the card, but you're going to lose a little bit of life to do it. Typically, that's worth it. -2, create a 2/3 black vampire creature token with flying and lifelink, so you can create a blocker that can block things in the air and heal you, so that's pretty obnoxious if you're fighting against it. And then for loyalty, he deals 13 damage to any target, you gain 13. I mean, in a 20 life game, this often just says kill your opponent. But if you can't, this can kill a creature, kill a Planeswalker, but typically you're just hitting your opponent for 13 and you gain 13. So in a 1v1 format, that ult's pretty big, but also typically you don't pick Planeswalkers based on their ults because they are quite tricky to get there. But essentially, this is kind of a very stereotypical Planeswalker. Normally it's +1, get some sort of card advantage, minus ability, create creatures or destroy creatures, and then ultimate win the game. And that's kind of how this reads to me, at least in a 1v1 setting. So I don't think it's that fun, but I do think that those are all very powerful things to do. Winning the game's good, creating creatures is good, and drawing cards is good, and so this can do all of that. As such, I do think it is a better Planeswalker than something like Kaya, where this can go in pretty much any black deck. Kaya has to go in a token deck, and I think that's where a lot of the value in this card lies. Next, we have Hallowed Haunting. It's also going for 20 bucks. It's 2 white for an enchantment, and it says as long as you control 7 or more enchantments, creatures you control have flying and vigilance, so you can make all your stuff fly and be able to block. So a lot of the time that just means free damage. You know, if you have flying, you might not still attack because you want blockers, and if you have vigilance, you still might not be able to attack, but having both is pretty good. And then it says, whenever you cast an enchantment spell, create a white spirit cleric creature token with this creature's power and toughness are equal to the number of spirits you control. Interestingly enough, that top ability doesn't turn them into spirits, so that you are going to want to run this in a spirits deck, but specifically one that also runs enchantments, which a lot of the spirits in this set have disturb, which then can turn them into enchantments. So that's kind of an interesting, thing. And then obviously for each enchantment spell you're casting, you're getting more spirits. So I think this will just be a card played in enchantment decks. There's all the cards you play, that create creatures, that make it so people can't attack you, all of that based on your enchantments, and this is just another one in that category. They've shown to be good in the past, and I don't think this one's any different. This one boosts all your creatures and then is just creating a creature whenever you cast an enchantment spell, which is just really good. Next we have Chandra, Dressed to Kill. It is a 3 loyalty, 3 cost legendary planeswalker. So 3 cost planeswalkers are typically, I don't want to say scary, but they're typically ones that can be really good. +1, add a red. Chandra deals 1 damage up to 1 player or planeswalker. Not a huge deal, but I do think, this is just red getting a little bit of ramp. +1, exile the top card of your library. If it's red, you may cast it this turn. This really reminds me, oh gosh, I don't remember the name of it, the Chandra from Kaiageist that has like multiple pluses, and you can get mana from it, or you can exile the top card of your library. This is a little bit, restricted. If it's red, you may cast it. First off, it says cast. Second off, it requires it to be red, so you can never get a land off of this, unless, there's no way to get a land off of this, I guess, unless it's, you turned everything in your deck red and you managed to get, I don't know how the ruling works on Arbor Elf. Arbor Elf, is that the right one? No, the creature, that's also a land. I don't know the ruling on that one. Either way, this is never going to get a land. Then -7, exile the top 5 cards of your library. You may cast red spells from among them this turn. You get an emblem with, whenever you cast a red spell, this emblem deals X damage to any target, where X is the amount of mana spent to cast that spell. Very insane emblem. Again, I don't really look at planeswalkers and go, ooh, what is their emblem? But I do think in a mono red deck that the both +1s are pretty good. I mean, you don't even need to be in mono red for the first one. I think it's pretty meh. None of the abilities really scream to me like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. But I do, again, think this is one where it can go in pretty much any red deck, similar to Soarin, unlike Kaya. And I typically don't like planeswalkers like that. I want planeswalkers that are really good at doing one thing, not just you throw this in every red deck, which I don't think you even do with this. But this is that kind of planeswalker that, nothing says you can't put this in equipment deck, but also nothing says you can't put this in an instant and sorcery deck. So, yeah. Next we have Cultivator Colossus. It is 4 green, green, green for a creature, plant, beast. Star. It's going for $21. It has trample, and it says its power and toughness are equal to the number of lands you control, which presumably is 7. Of course, you can get mana through other means, but, this thing is going to get bigger as it goes on. That's almost always good. And then when it enters the battlefield, you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. If you do, draw a card and repeat this process. So, first off, this, in essence, can say, when it enters battlefield, put all lands from your hand on the battlefield. But what's interesting is that for each land, you're also drawing a card. So let's say you play this and you have 1 land in your hand. You put it onto the battlefield, you draw a card. If you draw another land, you can then put that on the battlefield and draw a card. Actually, yeah, you only get to draw the card if you play the land. It's not like you draw a card and then do it. So you do need to have at least 1 when you play this card. So I do think that's kind of interesting, but I do think there are going to be times where you play this and then you put down 3, 4 lands on the battlefield. They are tapped, but now this thing's even bigger. You have even more mana. I think that in a green, ramp really fast deck, this is just another tool that people can use to both ramp and be a payoff for ramping, which I think can be kind of nice to have both on one card. So yeah, I think landfall decks are going to love this card, and I think that's just obvious. Next, we have Necro Duality. It's 3 and a blue for an enchantment. Whenever a non-token zombie enters the battlefield under your control, create a token that's a copy of that creature. So any zombie, any changeling, any of that, it will enter the battlefield and copy itself. I mean, even just taking a look, 1 in a black for a 2/2 zombie that does nothing else, that turns it into 1 in a black, create 2 2/2s. And that's pretty good. That's assuming you don't have any abilities on them. Let's say there's zombies that when they die, they create 2/2s. Well, now you have basically 4 creatures for, 2 mana or whatever. And so I think this is going to be a very, very good card if you're running zombies, but other than that, it's very specific. The other locations could be things like a changeling deck or decks that, you know, can turn all their creatures into all creature types, stuff like that. It's going to be good in, but typically this is just going to be played in those zombie decks. And, you know, if you have good ETBs, you get the ETB twice. And I just, you know, again, doubling things is good. I think I mentioned that earlier. That holds true here too. And lastly, we have Mana Form Hellkite, which is actually the same price as Necro Duality, but, you know, this one gets the #1 slot. It's 2 red for a creature dragon, 4/4 with flying. So a 4/4 with flying for 4, not bad. And then whenever you cast a non-creature spell, create an XX red dragon illusion creature token with flying and haste, where X is the amount of mana spent to cast that spell. Exile that token at the beginning of the next end step. So you cast, you know, you cast Shock for 1 red mana, you get a 1/1 that can attack, and then at the beginning of the next end step, you exile it. Now this happens even on your opponent's turn, which it says at the beginning of the next end step, not yours. So you typically want to cast the spells on your turn, but technically you don't have to. So you can be like casting Shock, and then it creates the dragon creature token, and then you could sacrifice that token to add mana. So there's lots of really interesting things you can do with this in a commander perspective, but also I think, you know, big red dragons that create mana are kind of a big thing right now, in like something like Standard, and I think this is just really good. You're casting lots of non-creature spells, you get to turn that basically into damage, and if not, you can kind of throw this in an aristocratic style deck. So I think this is just good in so many styles of decks that it is worth, you know, being one of the most expensive cards in the set. Now, obviously, I don't recommend any of you buy this on pre-order. I think the price is going to go down. I don't think it's that amazing. But then again, you know, cards like Meathook Massacre is now insanely expensive, although I could argue that was an insane card back then. Either way, that's not the end of the video. We have a little bit more to talk about. So these are the list of like prices for cards, comparing it to Midnight Hunt. So for instance, Midnight Hunt had Red and 7 at $35. I don't know what they're at right now, but you know, at the time of release for both sets, the other set, the top 3 cards were all more expensive. Honestly, the third most expensive card from Midnight Hunt was almost more expensive than the #1 card from Crimson Vow. However, you'll notice towards the lower end, they do maintain a little bit more value. So Kaiageist Hunter, Henrika Domnath, Cemetery Prowler are all greater, and even, you know, have a brook caretaker. So I do think, you know, you're not going to have as high of highs, but you also have a little bit more consistency. Looking at another thing, the rare lands are worth $5, which this is the second set of the cycle. Last time they were worth $6, so that is a little bit of a decline, but that makes sense. Typically, when people don't know how something is going to perform, they value it higher, but now that we've seen how the other colored lands did, they can have a little bit more of an accurate assessment of what price they should be. And then let's take a look at every rare over $4. So here's the thing. There was not a single rare in the top 10 list, which was not the case last time. Tovalar was in the top 10. One other rare was in the top 10. That list was all mythics. And I don't think that's good. I do think we need to have those rares that are worth something. I mean, the fact that $6, and actually that's one of the rare lands, soul lands, is $6. The rest are $4.99. So like, the fact that they are all so underpriced is unfortunate, but it's just kind of the way it is. So these are, I guess, your rares to look out for. And then the #1 uncommon is Wash Away at about $2. 1 blue for counter target spell that wasn't cast from its owner's hand, or you can cleave it for 1 blue. I think this is a really awesome version of Cancel. I think it'll see a lot of play. It's one of the better ones with upsides. I think the one with cycling, in my opinion, is better. I prefer the cycling part, but this is probably more competitive. Alright guys, that is it for this video. I hope you found it useful and interesting. If you have any thoughts, leave those in the comments down below. I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.